My name is Sal Cortez, and I am the president and CEO of the International School of Tactical Medicine. And what we're going to be talking about today is a course that over the last year and a half has been funded by both Cal-OES and one of the regional threat centers here in the state. And we'll talk a little bit about that if you're not familiar with it. But the course was designed a couple of years ago to address the civilian response, and not only the response, but the preparedness that is required to be able to address an active shooter event or other targeted violent event. And so the course is designed in 3 phases. It's really just a 6-hour course. It's perfect in that regard. But it is a small lecture, and then we have a hands-on skills portion. And then we put all of our students who are teamed up through a series of scenarios that are realistic in terms of the physical activity, the threats, weapons, sounds, moulage, etc. And so with that, the objective is to try to take away the notion that you can learn really important skills through a lecture or some video click that you're doing while you're at work. Because I know a lot of people have to take these types of courses online at work. And so this was developed and through the cooperation of Cal-OES and the Threat Center in which we operate in, we were able to garner some great funding to put on this class. So what we're going to do is going to just discuss that lecture portion of it as if it was the class, so that you get a good idea, it's a good overview about what we do in this course, okay? And please, if you have questions, please raise your hands, because there tend to be a lot of questions about some of the information, and I'm more than happy to answer them. Okay, again, a little bit about myself. I have about a 40-year career in both law enforcement and EMS. I spent 27 years and retired as a sergeant from the CHP. And for those of you who are like, oh, the CHP, you must have been just writing tickets all your life. No, you know, the Highway Patrol has a number of different tasks and responsibilities. And so I had a fantastic career because I was able to do a lot of different things, primarily because before I joined the Highway Patrol, I worked as a paramedic in Stockton. And for those of you who know Stockton, if 1 year working as a medic in Stockton is like working 7 years everywhere else. It's like a dog years. You get, so, you know, I've got a pretty good handle on trauma, etc. But I spent 27 years on the Highway Patrol, spent a lot of time as a tactical medic with our SWAT team, and flew on our helicopter as a flight officer paramedic, and then was fortunate enough to be chosen to be on the governor's protective detail as part of the security team, as well as the governor's medic. And so, although, you know, we were concerned about every aspect of the governor's health, my job was there in case something happened to him traumatically. And so, so that's what I did. And then I retired in 2015, and I took 2 years off, a little hiatus, and then I ended up working back again because I was just too young to retire, and started working for the Placer County Sheriff's Office, where I worked in their training division, in their basically developing tactical medicine for them, as well as being a weapons instructor. But all of this, and the reason I'm telling you this is because it has a bearing on why I'm here and why I have chosen to do this and why I developed this course. Because I mentioned I worked as an ambulance medic, and I worked in Stockton. And 1 month before I left to join the Highway Patrol in 1989, my partner and I got a call for a man with a gun at a school. And what it turned out was we ended up at the Cleveland Elementary School, what they called the massacre in 1989, where a young man drove his car around the backside of the school, lit his car on fire to create a diversion, and then went behind one of the portables there and then shot up the school ground while the kids were at lunch. He had at that time, you know, an AK-47 and a handgun. And unfortunately, 5 people were killed and 31 were injured. It was a very hectic scene. And again, this was in 1989, before almost nothing existed. In fact, the term active shooter had not even been coined yet. We went to a man with a gun. And all the other systems that are currently in place today didn't exist back then either. Things like incident command, triage was just a word back then. The notion of a tourniquet to stop bleeding was not even thought of, because we were more concerned about someone not losing their leg than saving their lives. And so we didn't carry tourniquets. So we were there, and it was a terrible event and very disorganized and very chaotic. And because no one had ever seen this before, everyone showed up. Fire, ambulance, paramedics, police, everyone at the same time. So you didn't have that notion of staging where people were quite a distance away. So it was a real chaotic mess. Ultimately, when it was all said and done, they brought a group of us into a room very similar to this, and there was an elderly gentleman at the front of the room, and he said to us, tell me how you feel. And these were all ambulance paramedics. And tell me how you feel about what happened out there. And you know, when you do that type of work, you don't really share your feelings. That's how you tend to be able to do what you do, by and large. Not necessarily the smart way, but that's what we did back then in 1989. And so we all climbed up as we would normally, because we didn't quite understand what it was he was asking. And he said to us, "Nobody's leaving here until someone starts crying." That's what he said, because he was trying to get us to get our feelings out about what we had seen and what we had experienced. Well, again, if you work in Stockton, Cleveland School is just kind of a bigger version of every other day that ends with a Y. And so, so we still, in fact, we almost got upset when he said that. So we did climb up even more. And so, you know, nothing happened. And at the end of the conversation, he said something that I still remember today. He said, "Trust me, no matter how terrible this thing was," and it was very terrible, "you will never see something like this again in your career. Never." A month later, I was in the CHP Academy. 6 months later, I was working in the Redwood City area, in the San Francisco area. And then 2.5 years later, I was flying. Now I'm back in Sacramento, and I'm flying, and we get a call to Lyndhurst High School in Olivehurst. And now I'm landing at my second active shooter event in my career. Except this time, not as a medic only, but as a law enforcement officer, working also as a medic. And so we land there, and this young man, former student, came in, had a grudge against his civics teacher, shot and killed him, killed 3 others, and then pretty much took a large group of students and held them hostage. And so I went in with the other deputies as they were trying to negotiate with him. And today, as I think about that scene, we were in the hallway with the room down the way where he was holding the students hostage. And what scene would that have played out even today, where you see a bunch of cops standing in a hallway trying to negotiate with someone? Uvalde. Now, the circumstances of Uvalde and the circumstances here were similar, except that you had a couple of decades of evolution of how to prepare, and yet nothing had changed. And so Uvalde is a situation which kind of brings to bear the notion of what happened both at Cleveland and at Lyndhurst High School. What I realized was that the worst thing that I saw was that the civilians were not prepared, that they were just basically laying there, standing there, hiding to be shot. They had no preparation. They didn't understand what their goal was. A lot of them would hide and beg for their lives. And I can tell you today, and I say this not to be harsh or in any way not speaking poorly of those who felt that when it happened, but begging for your life is not a strategy for survival, because we've seen in a number of events where shooters live stream their actions. They almost almost with humor, will shoot the person who begs for their life, because that's why they're there. They're not there looking to negotiate for those who beg and those who don't. So again, my objective in creating this course and delivering it was to try to prepare civilians who are there first. And we'll talk about that concept of being there first. So what we're going to talk about here in whole is like who active shooters are. What makes them an active shooter? How do they think? At the same time, we're going to talk about some of their behaviors and pre-threat activities and indicators that you would normally see. Because I think what I've heard echoing throughout a lot of the conversations I've seen when I've sat in on a couple of these classes is that people know when something's going to happen, but not always do they say something. And so this notion of leakage and knowing about something before it ever happens occurs all the time. In fact, most of the time when you hear a story where they talk to someone who's close to the person, they say, we thought there was something was going to happen. They knew already because they had some notion and there was leakage that was going on. But what we want to do is tell you how you can try to prevent the next attack. And that's the prevention part of this course, because it's not just about response, it's trying to prevent it. And then we want to give you a couple of ways to safeguard your own personal life and your workspace, because that's important just as well. And then lastly, what we talk about is how to provide life-saving medical care, because again, when these terrible things happen, sadly, people get hurt and people bleed. And so the ability to perform some level of life-saving medical care becomes integral in how you respond in these types of events. Okay, so I kind of mentioned it, but who are our first responders? When something terrible happens, if something happens in this building today, if God forbid something should happen, who do we rely on? Who are our first responders? Who would you say?
Fire department, PD.
Fire department and PD. Absolutely. Those are the people we count on to save lives, to help us medically, to ensure that we're okay. Who else would we rely on? How about the ambulance people? Remember, I'm an old ambulance guy. Come on, give me a little love. Okay. So we rely on these people. This is part of that EMS system that we call first response. But here's something you need to understand, especially as it pertains to this particular subject, that typically the average time of an active threat event is somewhere between 8 and 14 minutes. So from the moment someone steps on a campus or in a church or in a mall or wherever, they're going to do business for about 8 to 14 minutes before law enforcement gets there. Now, unless the PD is just right across the street, it's going to be a while, okay? And then you're not going to see fire and ambulance because they're going to be staging a mile or so down the street. So your period of time in which you're going to be there, a civilian who's in that event, is somewhere between 6 and 10 minutes because their response is 6 to 10. Takes them 6 to 10 minutes to get there. You're on your own for 6 to 10 minutes. Pretty much the party's over, sadly. And it's not a party, but the event is over because a lot of things have happened in that period of time. So when we ask who are the first responders, and I ask again, who are the first responders? And how about in the schools? Who are the first responders? Teachers? Security personnel, SROs, if you have them in your schools? And who said students? Yes, students. Now, depending on their age group, the students. Those are, so it's a collaborative effort when you have that first response system. But we're not only talking about schools. What about in our houses of worship? Who are our first responders? The people who are leading the services. More importantly, how about the people who are in the seats? Because they're the people that person is after. And anyone here belong to a safety team within a church? Okay, so today When we conduct this course at churches, there's usually 8 to 10 people who have formed a safety team, some of them armed, not necessarily so organized, but nonetheless there to try to protect the flock. And so it's become a bigger thing even within the churches. What about in our stores and our shopping malls and everywhere? When you go to a grocery store, who's there to help you? Well, how about the people who work there? Who else?
Sometimes they have security monitors.
How about the people who are shopping themselves? So again, when I ask, who are the first responders? You are the first responders. Because it's not because you want to be. And you can say, well, I'm not going to do that. Well, that's fine. I mean, I understand that. But whether you want to or not, you are the first ones there for about 6 to 10 minutes. And so what you do during that period of time will determine whether you survive or not. That's why we are conducting these courses, because we want to give you a sense of awareness on what it takes to reach that first responder level. So how do we prepare? Well, there are 3 simple ways. It seems simple to me, but sometimes not always so simple when people have to try to understand it. The first is mentality. You've got to have a new way of thinking, a new way of understanding what your role is, not as a victim, not only as a survivor, but as a responder, someone who's going to do something about it. When you develop that mentality, you now create a level of situational awareness that makes you more observant of everything that goes on. Who here doesn't walk into a store or a restaurant and like look around and kind of look at people? We do it all the time, more so than ever. You can kind of, the hair on your neck stands up, you're like, that person. So we become much more situationally aware. Some places not so much because, if we go to Disneyland right now, our objective is to try to avoid the 2-hour wait line, and then I usually like to be friends with the people with lightning passes. So having that situational awareness gives you the opportunity to be one step ahead of what may come and have a better response to it. Lastly is a mindset. Because once you have created this new mentality of understanding what you have to do and the situational awareness to understand everything that's going on around you, then when it comes time to respond, not only will you respond without hesitation, but you'll commit to that response. And that's the objective of becoming a better prepared first responder. So where are you most vulnerable? And again, this is kind of an older graph, but strangely enough, the statistics are consistent from year to year. So let's just kind of break this down. I always like to use this thing because it's so cool. Let's just talk about schools because we're here at a Safe Schools conference. Roughly 24% of all events occur in schools. And so that's something to think about because the vulnerabilities. And we hear from day to day an event that occurs at a school. And it could be something simple as a kid bringing a gun on the school to someone going in and starting to shoot the place up. And so it's very significant. What about government properties? 10% of all these things occur at government properties. What's an example of a government property, a government building where someone's really irritated? They're going to go off. Look at, I was the reason I moved over towards you. DMV. If you're sitting in this room, and you see now serving, number 152, and you're holding the ticket for number 5, you got to wait, okay? And so if you understand the frustrations of DMV, or how about this? Here's where one of the other places is unemployment office, Social Security, VA. I mean, pick and choose. There's a lot of places where people get frustrated and angry, and many of these places have hardened their security, but there's only so much you can do. Because I don't think they put everyone through a magnetometer at DMV. They should, but they don't, okay? So other spaces, 9%. 9%. What are those other spaces? Somebody give me a idea of what an other space where an event might occur? Concert. How about Vegas? Outdoor concert. Rain. Absolutely. So again, how about the 4th of July parade in Illinois 2 years ago? You know, you don't, I mean, a lot of these open air festivals are a great vulnerable because there's not a lot of security and not a lot of security to get into them. And so there's a lot of potential for problems that can occur. Residences, 4%, those usually tend to be home invasion style things. Houses of worship, fortunately, 4%. Why? Because they have learned to be much more careful about who goes into their church. So they might have 15 doors that enter the church, but only one of them has access. Lock everything up, flow in one way, flow out one way. And again, they have their security teams ready to roll. At the same time, they're training their own parishioners to be more prepared to face these types of events. Healthcare facilities, every now and then you hear, well, in fact, it's just within the last year that a young man went to a hospital in the ICU and killed, sadly, the officer who was responding and was taking people hostage. And so these happen in hospitals, but more often in doctors' offices. Why? Botched procedure. You know, if you're going to be a plastic surgeon, you better be good, because they don't get really happy about that. Here's the number that I want to roll up to, though. And that's this one right here. 45% of all of the events occurred in businesses. Restaurants, movie theaters, the mall, businesses. Who goes to those? Everyone in this room. Everyone in this room. So when we look at this graph, and we look at this chart here, where does training that prepares you to respond effectively and also prepares you to seek out and determine if something is fishy that you can report, where does it affect you? Everywhere. Every walk of your life is affected by these events, which is why it's so important to say, well, you know, I'm a teacher and, you know, we don't, you know, according to this, there's, you know, 24%, or I work at a church, it's only 4%. Yeah, but you go to the movies, you go to the mall, you go to a restaurant, etc. You go everywhere. You're pretty much in this entire graph. And so that's why a course like this becomes important to you, just so that you have that level of preparedness. So, who are these people? What do they look like? Well, and again, no offense, I could take the same number of pictures of each of you and put it on there and it wouldn't look much different. They don't look menacing, they don't look super scary, but they're people just like us who have different motivations for what they do. And so let's take this second to distinguish the difference between an act of violence versus a terrorist act. Because an act of violence is usually just not necessarily spontaneous, but one that has almost no common sense reason for why it's being done. Or if it does, it doesn't make a lot of sense. People don't like me, I'm bullied, I don't like particular people, just all across the spectrum of no real reason for wanting to do something. When you look at this gentleman here, this is our Vegas shooter in Mandalay Bay, still don't know why. And I mean, when you talk about the tactics and the preparation for what he did, he thought about it a long time. And he planned and he carried out almost a flawless execution. He took tactical high ground. He did everything that you could do possibly to hurt as many people as you wanted to, really, until it was over. This gentleman here in Maine, an Army reservist, just a psychological problem, just started killing people in a bar, in a bowling alley, etc. So unknown. Here's our Nashville shooter. She entered the Covenant School in Nashville and did a lot of terrible damage there. But when you look at them, they don't really look unusually different. because even down to our Uvalde shooter, not very different. These are acts of physical violence and that really have no rhyme or reason versus a terrorist act. Now let me just say to you that the difference between the two is that with a terrorist act, whether it be international or domestic or anything else, it's all based on some level of ideology that's related to religion, politics, racial or ethnic. And so they have a reason for why they do the things they do. I think the Tree of Life in Pittsburgh, the Jewish synagogue, he was obviously anti-Semitic. This young man here, if you recall him, the top shooter in Buffalo, and he did a lot of planning, and he did not like black people. And so he drove over 200 miles to get to this store, and he live streamed it. And how committed was he to a specific group of people that when you saw him live streaming, he went by one of the registers, he was just about ready to shoot someone, and it was a white person, and you hear him say, "Oh, sorry," and they kept moving on. He knew who he wanted and had no plans of shooting anyone else. So these people do this, and so we don't even have to go any further. You could look back to January 1, in one of the most heinous acts that occurred on Bourbon Street on New Year's Eve morning. Get in a car, drive it down Bourbon Street, and hit as many people as possible. Set out a series of bombs that never went off, and then get out of the car and bring a weapon. He basically did 3 of the things that we normally would see. Used a vehicle, used an explosive device, and used a gun. Why? Not because he was ordered by a radical group. He was inspired by ISIS to do what he did. And so what happens is that you see these different motivations. Sometimes, most often, they act in pairs. But anymore these days, the current Homeland Security forecast for 2025 says that many of these attacks, and you've seen them, will be conducted by lone wolves. And we've seen that already. We saw a gentleman throw Molotov cocktails at people at a Jewish event, and 2 more young Jewish people who were shot dead in Washington. And so these are all terrorist-inspired acts, okay? And so what is going on now, especially in our current environment in the Middle East, in Israel, you'll see more and more of it. Because as a result of current actions, even Iran is saying we are going to deploy our very secret cells that are here in the United States. So it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when, and to what degree it will occur. So what are the typical outcomes of these shooters? Well, again, they're either killed by law enforcement, and you folks down here in Southern California, you probably remember this a couple years ago, Monterey Park. It was like a 2-day spree of different types of shootings. And then we had something up in the San Francisco area where a guy went to his former work and shot up several of his employees. So a percentage of them are killed by law enforcement. Some commit suicide. And this is our Nashville shooter. And then here is our Illinois shooter, who not only took high ground and shot people from a rooftop, but then changed clothing to look like a female and fled. And because he had other plans to shoot up other places is how he eventually got caught. So generally they surrender. Here's our top guy here, and he just surrendered after his terrible, terrible act there in Buffalo. So the end of these things happen in a number of different ways, but what's important to know is that they pretty much succeeded in what they wanted to do in that 8 to 14 minute period of time, because the response is X, and it's hard to say what it'll be depending on where you live and what the availability of law enforcement is. So let's talk a little bit about behaviors and pre-threat indicators and how you become a better first responder by being able to understand how people think. Now there are a number of different courses, and I don't know the composition of this group, but if you have accessibility to a number of different courses that are put on by some of the state agencies here, one in particular for behavioral threat assessment, you should absolutely access that course, because it'll give you a clear idea of what it is you'll be able to see before it actually happens. When we talk about that, the intentional leakage is the primary thing that occurs. People, for whatever reasons, can't stop talking about what they want to do. Whether they do it through social media or verbally, they can't help themselves. They're going to talk. And so sometimes they're even nonverbal. You'll see stuff that's in writing, posted somewhere. So online threats occur, as well as online radicalization, which is a big thing, especially among our young population. Having the access to the internet and being able to just browse, there are groups out there that are just grooming young, impressionable minds to do terrible things. So it's incumbent on parents to be very alert and aware of what their teens are viewing online. So let's talk a little bit about what leakage looks like. This is Ethan Crumley, and I'm sorry, I'm standing in your way. In 2021, if any of you are familiar with it, in Michigan, he's a young student who just had some problems. We'll just say he had some problems, and pretty deep. But Ethan went to school one day, and while taking a test in geography, he started writing things on his paper. And one of the first things he wrote was, "The thoughts won't stop." And then also what you saw on that sheet of paper was blood everywhere. And you can see he has drops of blood on his paper. And then the last thing he wrote was, "Help me." Now, Ethan, and again, this is just an example of many things that occurred, but this is a real classic example because it goes far beyond in what occurred. The teacher passed this on to the principal, and the principal said, "I need to bring your parents in." And they brought Ethan's parents in, and they had a sit down with his parents, and his parents pretty much blew it off. He's just a kid. He didn't mean that. He didn't mean that. He's just a kid like any other kid. They asked him, "Do you mean that?" He said, "No, of course not." So what did Ethan's parents do after they left? They bought him a gun. What did they do after that? They took him to a range to shoot it. What did he soon do after that? He went back to the school and shot up the place. Okay? Killing 4 and injuring 7. But Ethan told everyone, "I've got a problem, and I can't stop myself, and I need help." And what happened was, as a result of this, obviously he was convicted, but it's, I think, really the first case where they convicted the parents as well for manslaughter. So no longer can parents just say, "Well, I got him the gun, I took him to the range, I did all these other things, and yet I'm not culpable for anything." We are culpable for our children. You have to take some responsibility for what they are and what they do. Other things that you would see most often as indicators and behaviors are changes in work and academic performance. And that's just common across the board, whether it be in school or work. So I think everyone works somewhere where they're like, "Man, what's wrong with that guy or that woman? Why are they so quiet?" Or there's always that one person that you work with or who what's going on in their mind. Well, usually you find out there's personal issues that are going on, and so you can almost understand that. But you just gotta get a weird sense when people are thinking bad things. And so you start to see these work and academic behaviors, grades drop, etc. Easily angered and physical aggression is very common, very, very common. And then sudden purchases of weapons and going to a range and shooting a lot, which is almost classic for anyone who is an active shooter. They start prepping by getting more accurate and more capable with the weapons that they have. Isolation and depression is also another component to this, because a lot of people, well, I shouldn't say a lot, there is a number of people who suffer from depression and mental health issues that find themselves in bad spaces and ultimately end up doing harm to other people, because they don't either seek access, or the system, and I'll make commentary. The system sometimes fails those same people, children and adults, because there's so many people. If you're a social worker, I feel sorry for you, because that is one of the toughest jobs in the world, trying to manage people, and your caseloads are hard, and you're just moving on to the next one. And so it's hard to understand sometimes when you know that someone has some mental health issue, but you can almost do nothing about it. But these are some of the behaviors and the indicators that you see. And so tell me, and you don't have to tell me, you've probably seen these things in people somewhere in your life. Aggression, anger, verbal, statements. I hate this person. I wish I could kill him. I wish he was dead. Things like this. This goes on all the time. And so at what point do you say he or she is just blowing off steam, or they're planning? Well, that's a decision that you have to make, but we'll talk about how you can kind of channel your thoughts and an action to that. Because the other things that are involved with is that, understand this, 41% of all cases concerning pre-threat indicators with active shooters before the incident occurs have been reported to law enforcement. And some of the common observers are people who are probably in this room, teachers, coworkers, etc. I have friends who are teachers, and all I have to do is ask, do you have any problem children? Wham! I get hit with the list of people who, and they feel like their hands are tied because their parents don't do anything. They're being asked to raise their kids, and it's just a real difficult situation. One of the things that occurred was a couple of years ago in 2023, the school safety bill was passed. Any of you familiar with that? Anyone in the schools here? Got a couple? Okay, you're familiar with this? So in 2023, a bill was passed because, again, like in Ethan Crumley's case, what the principal did there was he kept it in-house. He didn't say anything because, listen, it's an optics thing. Let's just try to work with the parents. They said he's okay. Ethan said he's okay. All right, we'll put that in this file here and we'll just hold on to it. Well, here in California, they thought we can no longer do that because it's turning out disastrous. And so there were two main things that came out of that bill. And the first was that it required all school officials, administrators, teachers, et cetera, to report any threat or perceived threat of violence to law enforcement officials. So those perceived threats are just as strong as an actual threat. So you can't just say, well, it doesn't meet the standard. In fact, I heard someone today or yesterday talking about that. And in their school, and I didn't ask what school they're from, but very similar to this, like something happened and we just kind of kept it in-house. You're here in California? Yeah, okay. Obviously not aware of this law. And so it helps everyone, and it forces the administrators to do their part because they weren't. The other part of it is that the schools have to send out an annual notice to parents regarding the safe storage of weapons in the home. And that becomes important because as we talk a little bit more about this, you'll see that there's a lot of weapons that are just free-floating in the homes. Here in California and everywhere. I mean, some states, weapons are like furniture. But making sure that you store your weapons safely is so important because so many people get injured as a result of an accidental discharge, really neglect discharge, negligent, at a home. Here's a good example. So what's more dangerous than a 3-year-old with a gun? The parent who probably put it there. Because once it goes into its double action, the trigger pull is a breath. And so what rule did he violate of handgun safety? Never put your finger on the trigger. Never put your finger on the trigger until you're ready to fire it. I think I'll grab the weapon by the trigger. Okay?
I think he was more scared of the wife than the gun.
He was already like, that's not my gun. So again, making sure weapons are safely stored is an important and vital part of ensuring that young kids don't get a hold of them, and kids who might plan to do damage and harm to others don't have access to them. And we'll talk a little bit about that here, because it still occurs. It still occurs. So what can you do? What can any of us do to try to stop or stem this flow of targeted violence, things that happen across our country every day? Every day. Well, kind of the 3 things that I talked about, but certainly one of them is to be situationally aware of your surroundings, understanding everything that you see, and giving yourself not only just what you see, but things that will assist you. So for example, how many exits are there in this room? No, look. Okay, so there are 3, all right? And when you become situationally aware, the moment you put yourself in that seat, you're like, oh, that's pretty obvious. It says exit, and that says exit, and this is the door I came in from. So the smart people are sitting right over there in that corner next to the door, okay? And so understanding your awareness and the surroundings in which you're in allows you to better be prepared. 9/11. The mantra post 9/11 was see something, say something. It holds true today. It holds true today because it's not just about terrorism, it's about all levels of violence. And being able to say, I see something, and so I'm going to say something. And then beyond that, reporting suspicious activity. Now, there are 2 ways to do that. And that comes up all the time. So if this is an exigent circumstance, an emergency, if someone's coming down the hall with a gun, then what are we going to do? Besides, we'll just say the run, hide, fight thing, but what else are we going to do? Call 911. We're going to call law enforcement, right? We need some superheroes. That's me. And so we need people to come in, and we need people to mitigate that threat. And then we also need EMS to come in to deal with anyone that gets injured. But what happens if it's not an emergent situation? What if it's something that you just kind of are observing within your workspace, within your neighborhood, anywhere? And you see someone who's like, I hear that guy speaking of perpetrating a terrorist act. You know, or I hear Ethan Crumley saying he wants to kill people. I see something that he's written on the wall. Do I call 911? Well, you could, but there are other ways, because again, you don't necessarily have enough evidence to get, a swarm of people on that person. It's not an active deal. And so you have this other option, and that's the Nationwide Suspicious Activity Reporting Initiative. That's a mouthful, and so we just call it NSI, Nationwide Suspicious Activity Reporting Initiative. And let's talk a little bit about that, okay? Because is anyone aware of it? A hand? Okay, we got a couple, good. So the NSI is a kind of a collaborative effort by both Homeland Security and FBI. And in a nutshell, what they do is they kind of provide law enforcement tools to try to combat terrorism and other forms of criminal activity. And what they do is they invest state stakeholders into the ability to work within themselves, because post 9/11, what they figured out was, hey, we can't, the FBI cannot see the whole world. How about if we have some agents of Homeland Security and the FBI working to do it within their own regions? And so here in our state, because there are, I believe, 80 threat centers. They go by different things, fusion centers, threat centers. And so here in our state, we are fortunate to have about The big five, I like to call them. What's that?
KRC is really good.
Yes. So the suspicious activity reporting system is what you utilize to make that notification like, hey, I'd like to report that. And it can be online, it can be anonymous, it doesn't require a lot of anything other than the opportunity to go online and say, I'd like to report something suspicious. And so much of this is kind of revolves around the Governor's Office of Emergency Services as they kind of, I would just say orchestrate a lot of the activities within these threat centers. I operate, ISTM, my company operates out of the Northern California Intelligence Center, CCIS, Central California, CCIS, but there are a number of others. And CCIS, strangely enough, is like 34 counties. And then we have here, Orange County, where we're at, they're one county. But they have a lot of work here. They've got a lot of potential for terrorism, they've got a lot of potential for violent crime, and then there's some other issues that we won't get into, but they're busy. They're very, very busy here. And so these organizations within the state have this system for reporting suspicious activities online. And so what does that look like? Well, let's look at Orange counties, and they go by the name OCIAC, Orange County Intelligence Center. So when you go to the Orange County website, the OCIAC website, which is right here, you have basically on their face page, right in the upper right corner, you have this ability to submit a tip for a potential threat. And when you get to that page, it's just going to ask you a series of questions. I mean, there's some other information. You can give your name or not, because a lot of people are like, I don't want to give my name. Well, that's fair. I understand that. Some people just say, I don't think it meets, the threshold for me reporting it. That's the person who needs to report it, because if one hair on your neck stands up, it doesn't hurt anyone for you to report it. They're not going to call you and say, are you kidding? No, they're going to look at it, because in these centers, there are analysts that are there all day long assessing the SAR that you just submitted. And they have the ability to do more of a deeper dive based on the information that you provide to them. And if it's viable, and if it poses a threat or a strong perceived threat, now they're not a law enforcement unit, but they have access to all the law enforcement units because many of their personnel come from law enforcement agencies. And so they can immediately affect that type of warrant service that says, hey, go and look at this because something's happening there. We've got this suspicious activity report that says something might be happening, something might be going down. And so that's why they are so important, because who are you going to call before that? Well, you might call the PD, but if it's not an emergency, and we know that they are understaffed and overworked and are behind in calls, and their ability to get to something, especially since you've just got a hunch, could take quite a while. Yes?
What about Riverside County?
Riverside County belongs to JRIC. Yeah, so there's like Riverside, San Bernardino, LA County. And I believe OCIAC used to be part of them, then they seceded. Is everyone?
I just wanted to point out that OCIAC, actually, if you look at that button down, they actually have a button specifically to submit school SARs.
Perfect.
And there are, I think, 2 or 3 other fusion centers that have that as well. All of the information that you report on these SARs, they become a law enforcement document, so they're not subject to a PRA. They're very difficult to get a hold of. So if you're concerned about optics in your school, this is a place that you want to report. Additionally, all of those fusion centers, the trends that we analyze and identify, we share them. So we're sharing them all across the state so that we can spot trends and let the schools know through the superintendents what we see kind of coming down the pipe, so we can stop something before it happens.
And that's an important element. Tina mentions she's with Cal-OES, so like you have questions, she's the person, go straight to her. This ability to share across the state is so vitally important, so that because people don't necessarily stay where they are, there may be trends that that deal with outside of that particular fusion center, so you can have a more collaborative effort to try to run this thing to ground. So again, important. Really, these are the 5 basic things that they want to know. What did you see? Who did you see? Where did you see it? When did you see it? And what makes you think it's suspicious? You know, and it's, you know, if you just think, well, the hair on my neck stands up, I just think it looks very suspicious. Fair enough. Let them determine the viability of that particular report. Okay? Extremely helpful tool in the prevention of any targeted violent act is this SARS system. So let me show you how it works in some form or fashion. I like to, again, there are many examples, but I like this one a lot. This is Ontario, at Ontario Christian School. Anyone familiar with this? It's only 35 miles away from here. Yeah, occurred in, February 24. So a young man in the school was starting to make a lot of verbal threats and accusations towards people, towards specific groups, and then he decided that he was going to do some damage and was forming a hit list of people whom he wanted to kill. And like a lot of people, again, there was a ton of leakage. Just the mere fact that he was kind of saying these things is its own leakage. But he started to really pump himself up to get ready for this. And so he took this picture of himself. You know, we call these legacy tokens. You know, it's like a manifesto. This is what I'm leaving for the world to see for what I plan on doing. And so he had this plan. But let's talk a little bit about what his leakage was and what he planned on doing and what he did. His behavior and pre-threat indicators, well, he started discussing this hit list with his fellow students. And with that list was a hatred of LGBTQ plus groups. So he had a specific group of people he intended to hurt. Which, is this an act of violence or is this a terrorist act? Terrorist act. He has a very specific penchant toward a group of people that he does not like. So it's an ideological thing. And then he also had a fascination with the Columbine attack. So he's into this notion of mass shootings. And he sees Columbine as the top of the mountain for what a good school shooting would look like. And then he started doing a lot of online searches on extremist ideologies. They do that, A, to get some ideas, but B, to pump themselves up, to get more inspired. They do that because it helps them to take the next step. Here's what some of his planning looked like. He started kind of checking law enforcement responses from their station to the school, from different locations to the school. So he's trying to figure out what? Do I truly have that 8 to 10 minutes of time that I need to do what I want to do? And then he started choosing a date for the attack, and he chose 4/20/24. 4/20, what is that? I always get a mixed review. Let's.
Columbine anniversary, Hitler's birthday.
Very good. Some people will say, smoke them if you got them. It's correct. It was the 25th anniversary of Columbine on this date. So he wanted to commit this terrorist act on the 25th anniversary of Columbine. So that was his date. And then he started stockpiling weapons. Now keep in mind, he's not old enough to stockpile anything other than a BB gun. So what's he doing? How's he doing that? Well, here's how the attack was prevented. First off, a student overheard the attack on 2/8/24. So, you know, we're a few days away from the 20th. He notifies the principal, but because of SB 906, what's that principal compelled to do? Contact law enforcement, right? So this isn't Principal Smith in Michigan. This is in California, where a law says you have to report this. It's not even a perceived threat. This is a threat. This is viable. Yes?
Does the SAR check that box?
I'm sorry?
Does the JRIG or the other thing check that box?
In what way?
And that to satisfy SB 906?
I don't think it's...
I don't think so.
No. It's just, I mean, it was I think it addressed what was going on across the nation and primarily in the schools. I think for those of you who are in education, you know you like to keep your business in-house. And we don't like to tell anyone what's going on because it puts a bad wrinkle on both the administration and the school district. And that's not a good thing. And so they need to be more transparent, and this law absolutely tells them they have to have some level of transparency. So no, it does not. So the principal notified Ontario PD under 906, and an investigation led to arrest and confiscation of weapons 10 days before his date of execution of this attack. And so when they went to the house and they served this warrant, here's what they found. 7 rifles, 3 handguns, 1 shotgun, and 1,000 rounds of ammo, all accessible to this young man. Who'd they belong to? His parents. You know, again, what are his parents in violation of? The second act of SB 906, you have to store all your weapons safely. So they're making them all accessible. Imagine if he was able to perpetrate what he planned on doing. 1,000 rounds of, I mean, you know, and quite honestly, what occurs at a lot of these events is that the person comes loaded for bear. They don't just come with a gun. They come with many weapons. That's their fantasy. They rarely, unless they have all that extra time, they rarely use more than one because they've got a lot of magazines. They have more than one weapon, but they rarely use more than one. So that's what occurred, and that attack was prevented, and it really kind of goes to the heart of prevention and people seeing something and saying something. And congratulations to that young man who had the courage to say, Principal, this is what I've heard. Now, he wasn't the first one to hear that. He's just the one who said something. Okay? And so that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get people into this notion of, like, I can't allow this to happen in my school, in my workplace, when I go to the mall. I don't want to. In fact, as you look at these things in retrospect, and the school shootings, and many of the school shootings, you know how you could tell that a school shooting was going to happen? Attendance went down. Why? Because the kids knew. And so they just didn't show up. So they were texting each other like, don't go to school. In fact, sometimes even the shooter would tell friends, don't go to school tomorrow. So yeah, it's important for us now to get engaged in the prevention and alerting authorities when this is going to happen. All right, swatting. Anyone familiar with the term? Yes. Okay, so we know this as a hoax, as a 911 hoax. It seems to happen a lot in the LA area with celebrities. Usually it involves a law enforcement response. They call it swatting because they presume that a SWAT team will show up, but most often it's just a group of law enforcement personnel who will show up. Most calls are active shooter level threats. Most often it's schools and businesses. Schools and businesses, 68%. And there's a what the reason? I don't know. I mean, maybe some kid didn't do his homework and now he wants to, not go to school that day. He's going to just call in a threat. All of a sudden, you've got this big lockdown, school's out, everything's locked down, nothing happens that day. All hoax, prank phone calls, okay? It's designed to create terror and fear and chaos. And so by its nature alone, it really is very much an act of domestic terrorism. Okay? So we have to see these things, even though they are not necessarily real, as still a form of terrorism. Because they're creating that sense of terror in the people that they're calling it in toward.
It's a terrifying moment as a SWAT team bursts in. But imagine if they've been summoned by a hoaxer. It's called swatting. Someone calls 911 to report a hostage situation, sending SWAT team races to the scene.
There were people 5 feet away from you, guns and rifles.
It happened to Mike Stack, a conservative blogger. A SWAT team surrounded Stack's home minutes after receiving this chilling 911 call.
I had killed my wife.
You killed your wife, and how did you kill her?
Stack showed our Lisa Guerrero how he was dragged from his home in the middle of the night.
Mark, were you afraid that you could have lost your life that night?
I believe I probably could have lost my life.
Jordan Matheson is another swatting victim. He was playing a computer game when the SWAT team burst in after a 911 call about a massacre that turned out to be bogus. Miley Cyrus is another victim of swatting. A SWAT team surrounded her LA mansion after a phony call that she was being held hostage.
We checked the residence, there's nobody home. We believe it's a prank call.
This knucklehead actually set up a swatting channel. He made $4,000 by charging viewers to watch him calling hoaxes, like this one targeting Purdue University.
Craig, will you tell me if you got a call at 5 p.m. to the farm, we'll find the bomb.
And he swatted Florida State University Student Center, laughing after Florida another bogus bomb scare.
Guys, look, everybody is leaving.
Ashton London served 2 years of federal juvenile detention.
I would never do anything like this again.
Now, in Wichita, Kansas, a father of 2 was gunned down by a police officer after a bogus 911 call allegedly made by 25-year-old gamer Tyler Barris from his home in Los Angeles, 1,400 miles away. It's what authorities feared would happen, a swatting incident causing the tragic death of an innocent man.
It's sad, but has anyone ever been at a scene where a swatting event had occurred while you were there? Yeah, what can you tell me a little bit about?
So ours was, I'm an SRO in our area, and one of our elementary schools got a call that there was a bomb on campus, and everybody had to evacuate. So I get to that school site. As I'm at that school site, another one of our school sites, probably like a mile away, got the same call. So we had officers go down there. And then another school site about a mile away got an active shooter call. And we traced it back to one 7th grade student that was at one of the school sites that was calling me.
Yeah. It's crazy. I don't even know how to say it otherwise. And you know, you wonder what's going on in that home. You wonder what's going on with this child. You know, there are so many layers to the whys of why swatting occurs. And so, you know, unless you're a kid in college who's trying to make money off of it, he obviously has a financial motivation. But it's a real thing. And, you know, the objective is to not get people hurt, because sometimes, as you see, and I won't make any criticism on the law enforcement response there, but, you know, something terrible can happen. Okay, and so we just want to make sure that these types of swatting events don't occur. But unfortunately, there's very little that you can do about it. All right, so what is your plan? And how do you, in the event of an attack or a targeted violent attack, active shooter event, mass casualty event, how do you save yourself? How do you prevent yourself from getting injured, et cetera? Well, the standard national universal, you know, plan is to run, hide, fight. And so, and I'll say this again, watching this video or watching this presentation, or maybe even doing a click on your computer at school or your business when you're required to go through active shooter training online is okay, but it's not, you don't get the sense of realism and the reality of what occurs when that happens. My analogy to it is this. If my house was on fire and the fire department showed up and they said to me, and they got out and you could tell that they were a little nervous about the whole thing, my house is fully engulfed, and I went to the captain and I said, hey, are you gonna be able to put the fire out, man? It's really raging in there. And he's like, yeah, we should be able to do that. Like, well, you don't sound very confident. Well, we've only learned how to fight fires by watching videos. We've only had lectures. We got to look at the tools, but we never got to use them. So I don't know what it feels like to be in a dark room where the roof may collapse in on me. I don't know what the smell of smoke looks like. I don't know what the sounds of a fire sounds like. We're gonna give it a shot. How confident would you be in that fire crew? Okay, so the reason it was my intention to create a scenario-based courses, because when you watch these things on video, when you're just clicking on a screen, you have no idea of what, I don't want to say what you're missing out on, but what you're missing in the reality that goes along with it. The sights, the sounds, the chaos, and also the ability to form a team. Because again, if you just did this online and something happened in here, we don't know who the team leaders are. We just don't know. But when you do scenario-based training, you develop leadership that when you get caught in that situation, you know what you can do because you practice to do it. And so that's why we take a more aggressive stance to run, hide, fight. And that's all components: run, hide, and fight. So let's talk a little bit about your own personal safety. And we'll just go briefly over it. Your work safety. Whether you work in a hospital or a school or anywhere where you work, you now need to be much more aware of your work surroundings. Again, much in the same way as when you walked in this room. I got a door there, I got a door there, I got a door there. You know I've got several points of egress. More importantly, in your workspace, do you know where the best place to hide is? Because if you can't run, where's the best place to hide? And is it locked? Can I prevent myself? And then once I get in there, can I barricade properly? All right? So we tell you, take a walk around your work site. Look at, because a lot of people say, yeah, there's an exit door over on the other side of the building, and when you get there, it's blocked by everything. Or it's locked. If we lock those crash bar doors, you're not getting out. And so you want to make sure that you have accessibility that is unimpeded. In addition to that, let's talk about your personal safety. Cop. Where do all the cops go when they go into the restaurant? Where do they sit?
Facing the door.
Facing the door. Where do they sit even for beyond that? Toward the back. You know, because we want to see what's coming at us. I don't want to be in front of the windows. I don't want a car to drive through. I don't want to be shot at. And so I'm not saying, tonight when you go to dinner, if all of you are in the corner of a restaurant, they'll say, hey, what are you doing? Well, ISTM taught us to do this. And like, okay, well, some of you got to sit here. The point is you need to kind of be more tactical about where you are when you go to places. And so just be a little more cognizant of the safe spots, understand, being aware of your surroundings. We talk about that situational awareness that I mentioned early on. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't enjoy yourself, but you should sit down and take a look at where you're at, enjoy yourself, and periodically take a look at where you're at and see who's coming through the door. That's all it takes. Because what you don't want to do is find yourself sitting at home afraid to go out. Try facing the entrance, and again, points of egress. Why would you want to sit near the kitchen? Because there's an exit there. They don't take their deliveries of their produce through the front door. They get to the back door. Sit near the kitchen. Plus, good food back there. So these are the ways that you can safeguard your own personal safety in your workspace. Just a couple of ideas and things that you should understand. As far as a school safety plan, we go to a number of different schools, and I have, they're fortunate enough to be willing to share with me their emergency action plans. And so what I walked in thinking was that everyone just says lockdown, lockdown, lockdown. That's always been the universal response to anything terrible, lockdown. But more and more now I see built into these emergency action plans, these EAPs, this notion of lockdown or run if you have the ability to do it. Shots are being fired from a great distance, and we understand, and here's a door, I'm running. We're taking the kids and we're getting out of here. So running is an option if it is a viable option, but not something that you should do unless you know you have a clear path to a clean egress and a safe space. And so one of the things that we talk about, and again, if you're from a school or from a school district or otherwise, but this even applies to your work, there are processes and abilities for your regional threat center to come and assess the infrastructure of your building, your campus, et cetera, and the vulnerability of it. How much does it cost? $0. It's absolutely zero. So they're going to go there, they're going to be there for a couple days, they're going to take a look at, and so, you know, I've been involved in a couple of them. We come out about a mile, we look at the outer ring, we come down to the perimeter, we check that out. They don't even have a fence. There's your first strike. And then we go to the building, and then we start assessing cameras, access points, etc. What does everything look like? And then they present you with a big folder that says these are your vulnerabilities, and these are the recommendations we have, in maybe an order which says these are the most important things to address. And you can do with it whatever you want. It doesn't put you or your business or your school in a bad light if you don't do anything. But it gives you the opportunity to say when we have the funding or otherwise we can do it. And in some instances, if you're a nonprofit, then there's grant money available to actually take care of some of those things. So something to think about. And I also saw out here today, there are a number of private companies that do the same thing. So in transitioning into that, this EMS notification plan, is anyone familiar with the Catapult system? Yeah, so I went to a couple of schools and they were showing me their Catapult EMS system. Pretty phenomenal. It's a great notification system, kind of keeps everyone online and on board, and when something happens, then either administrator or principal, et cetera, can almost let everyone know what to do. Because there are a lot of schools that don't have that capability, that aren't so advanced and that aren't so new, but you need a system to notify, whether it be an active shooter event or a fire or whatever, how to notify the teaching staff and what to do in the event of. Other things that go down with it are like initiating lockdown and evacuation procedures. And any of the schools that you guys work at, do you have safety teams, site safety teams? Yeah, so again, it's like anything else. Being trained once is good, but if you don't have recurrent training, you will forget immediately what you learned a month later and a year later when you need it. You'll like, huh, what was I supposed to do? And then you have this constant movement of people moving from one place to another, and then they never get trained. So those are the important things that you need to understand. The last thing is providing emergency medical care and being able to provide just the essential medical care in the event of some emergency. All right, let's talk about run. Simple things to remember. When to run, right? We talked about, hey, shots are just outside that door, we're not running anywhere. We have no door here, we have no door there. We just got this door, we're gonna barricade here. How to escape though? Here's where it becomes important. Understanding that just running and everyone screaming out of the doorway is gonna just draw attention to yourself. And so you have to do it in a very orderly fashion. And so whether you're in a school or otherwise, someone has to take leadership. Hey, listen, we're gonna quietly go out of here. We leave everything here, you leave your purse, maybe you take your cell phone, but we're getting out of here. And what happens if someone says, I don't wanna go, I think we're safe here. You like sign of the cross and then you move on, okay? You go out, you've gotta leave, you know, the needs of the many will outweigh the needs of that one person who believes they should stay there, okay? Contact with law enforcement is a key part. Making sure that you come out with your hands up and hands open, because anything in your hand to a person who's just as afraid as you are may trigger something that you don't want to happen. At the same time, not having 50 people come up to that law enforcement person and give 50 different versions of a story is not what we want either. So you need a spokesperson. This is where we are, this is what we saw, this is what they look like, we're gone. And then they're gonna send you down the road to get out of there. Cover versus concealment. We tell you once you get to a point of safety, you need to understand that just hiding behind a bush is not safe enough when you've got a .223 round that's flying through the air from a high-powered rifle. It'll cut through a lot of things, including any of these walls here. And so you need to understand the difference between cover, or concealment rather, a bush, and cover behind the block of an engine, behind a vehicle, behind maybe a series of walls. You've got to kind of give yourself this idea: am I hiding or am I preventing myself from being injured? You want both.
First and best option to survive is run. Get out. Quickly and safely evacuate the area. can get out, do it. Scatter and run. Get as far away as you can. Once you're safe, call 911.
Here's my takeaway point from that. If you're that big, don't hide behind a skinny tree, right? Okay. But that's cover, but that's cover for, not body shaming anyone. I'm just simply saying that's not going to save you. Okay. I'm glad because I always hear someone. Okay, now I can say something. All right, very good. Hide, establish leadership. Okay, now I'm going to avoid the videos because we're at our latter end here. Once you find yourself having to hide, now's the time when leadership becomes important. Know this, no matter who you are, in this group of people in this room, I can already pick out who our leaders are. I can kind of figure out who our followers are. And in every group, there are people who will freeze. And we can't force them into being anything other than what they are. They're terrified. This is, I didn't sign up for this, is how they're emotionally thinking. And so, but the leaders have to come forward. And the followers have to be capable of being a good follower. Because what happens when you have too many leaders? Now you've got politics. Really, that's a nice way to say it. It's like going to the state capitol. Okay, and so how to prepare your space becomes an important part. That leader has to start saying, hey, listen, we need to start barricading this door. Understanding that if this is a door that has an outward swing, then we got to raise the roof on our barricade because this person is going to be able to open the door. And if you have ways, if you have kind of MacGyver skills, then you're going to find ways to latch these two doors together, understanding that these are just deterrents. They're not fail-safe. And so, but know this, remember, 8 to 14 minutes. So if I'm a shooter and I'm going through a series of halls, it's like going through a parking lot looking for a stolen car. Am I going to go to the car that has the alarm and the club on the steering wheel, or am I going to go to the car that looks like it's unlocked? I'm going to the one that's most easiest to get into. So if I open a door and it's jiggling, but I've got a crack in there and I see a whole bunch of tables and chairs stacked up, am I going to try to work my way into there? No. More importantly, I'm thinking these people have it going on and I might get myself beat up if I go in there. They're going to move on. So all we're doing is creating a series of deterrents. We're trying to prevent them from saying, this is the room I want to get into. Where to hide in a room is important. Making sure that you're not in the sights of a round that will go off. So you're going to be in places that, if you're imagining where, you're going to do that. And then designating the responsibilities to make a call. Whoop. Let me go here. Fight. But let me go back to the 911 thing. Calling. Make sure that you have someone who's competent, because if you get someone who just starts screaming and yelling and saying, you've got about this, and there's people coming, there's people dying, that's not the person you want. Hey, this is Sal Cortez. I'm here at the Delta Hotel. I'm in Catalina 1, and there's appears to be an active shooter. We hear a lot of gunshots. I only hear one gunshot, and we're here. Calm as you can be. Take care of that. Okay, fight. Identify weapons. As we look at this room, I see a ton of weapons. Some of them you're sitting on them. Some of them may be in your own personal wallets or purses, etc. Everyone has some ability to fight. And so what you have to understand is that, as with a lot of things, and again, I hate to transition into law enforcement tactics, etc., but speed, surprise, and violence of action is actually what wins the day. When that person walks through that door, you cannot give them the opportunity to think anything but, I am almost afraid to go into this room. Because this is not going to be a casual confrontation. We have got to attack like our life depends on it. And so when you take a course like ours, we foster that type of attitude, and we show you where to grab a gun. Because if the guy comes to the room and I grab his gun, and it's a long gun, an AR-15 style weapon, and I don't grab the barrel, which is scorching hot, I grab the guard, but I do this, I'm pointing it all at you. My objective is to point it down, understanding that even if he fires off a crack and some of the shrapnel spills, some of you may get injured, but I'm not pointing the gun directly at you. So there are a lot of things that we teach in even how to deal with the attacker. And then once you get that attacker to the ground, yes?
I just wanted to kind of pass this on. In working in law enforcement, a lot of our dispatchers request that a lot of times when you call in, they want you to leave that open line because typically the 911 dispatcher is going to ask you a series of questions, and obviously we understand the mechanic and the nature of the incident. However, it provides so much details when you leave that open line. People tend to want to hang up because they hear there's shooters coming or whatever incident they're going through, they typically hang up. You're providing law enforcement and dispatch so much information by leaving that line open. And so we're encouraging to kind of pass that information on because there's so much to be gained. If there's an active shooter, you can still hear the shots. So that way officers know, because the dispatchers can update the officers, hey, this shooting is still continuing, we hear shots going on in the background. So you can pass that on to your staffing, and it's definitely something that...
That's an excellent point. Again, keeping that line of communication open, and again, having the right person, not having 10 people call 911, just one, okay? And make sure that that line stays open because that 911 dispatcher is going to be flooded with calls and having to say, I know, thank you very much, and hang up and deal with what they've got going on. So yes, thank you very much for saying that. Again, securing weapons is important, understanding that our job is not to take the weapon and to shoot the person, as much as you might want to feel that way. Once they're disarmed, they're no longer a threat to you with that weapon, which becomes the important component of securing them, sitting on them, hitting them, doing whatever it takes to neutralize that person. Search for secondary weapons. We always teach, again, I mentioned everyone carries another weapon. That doesn't mean they're going to use it, but they've got them, knives, guns, etc. And so you've got to look for those secondary weapons. And then once you drag them out of the way, you secure the weapon in another safe location, you re-fortify your door, and you wait for the next threat or law enforcement that's coming through. And because you've got that open line of communication, you're going to say, okay, there's someone knocking on our door saying they're Orange County PD or Orange PD, and we'll say, we'll pass them a password, or we'll say, the officer asks him to tell us what his name is, et cetera. You're confirming who it is that's at that door. Okay, so that you don't open the door to the wrong person. Because a lot of times people who are shooters will say, let me in, I've been hurt, and it's a threat. Okay? Okay, the last component of our class always deals with life-saving medical care. And there are really two components. I mentioned to you earlier that bleeding is a major issue. 60% of all trauma-related deaths occur as a result of blood loss. 60%. Now there's some levels of bleeding that you cannot deal with. Shot in the belly, shot in the chest. What does that person need? A surgeon. So what you can do though, when people have extremity wounds, type wounds, is that you can try to stop and arrest that type of bleeding. And so in our class, we teach the use of tourniquets. And anyone carry a tourniquet? Perfect. And so using it, knowing what and how to use it is so important, and making sure that you carry one. They're probably smaller than many cell phones, and so why wouldn't you carry one, Because the necessity to have one when you need one is super important. You can bleed out in about 4 to 6 minutes. You have about 5 liters of blood in your body, but you only need to lose 1.5 liters to effectively die. You will die with 3.5 liters of blood because you'll go into cardiac arrest because you can't support the blood. So again, having this, putting it on and ensuring that you place it high and tight. This is the part I don't like. And then just making sure that it's tight. Is all it takes to stop the bleeding that just occurred as I was just shot in the arm. I secure this back over, I take this ribbon, I secure it there, and does it hurt? Yes. It's not designed for comfort, okay? When we teach, again, the ISTM, what we teach primarily is law enforcement personnel. We have 1 week, 2-week courses, all tactical medicine, a lot of tactics, a lot of tactical medicine. So we use tourniquets almost daily, virtually daily. And so one of our drills is for them to be shot and to fix themselves and to continue in the fight. And so, yes, this thing hurts right now, but taking it off or not putting it on in the first place will mean that I likely will bleed out, okay? And so what we want you to understand is that it's important to understand these concepts of bleeding control. At the same time, we know that when people go unconscious, one of the first things that becomes compromised is their airway. So we also teach simple airway maneuvers, including a recovery position that allows them to continue to breathe and allow fluids to drain and to displace their tongue from the back of their throat. And so those two concepts and understanding where you can do them, because again, cover and concealment, we don't want you to be in a hallway treating someone, because that's where they got shot. We call that the X. You don't want to treat on the X. We want to bring them off the X to a place of cover and concealment before we can do any work with them. If they're capable of walking or standing, then you should get them up. Don't let them be a victim. Stand them up, get up, let's go, let's go. If I've been shot in the arm, there's no reason why I can't walk, all right? Drag them if necessary. Okay, I hope this has provided you with a kind of an overview of what we do with this civilian course. It is a course that currently is, through some very generous grant funding, allows us to come to your school or your church and provide this training. You just need to provide a space. And so take a look at this email address, or our website rather, and if you feel like it is something that you're interested in, please come by. If you go to our table, you'll see that we have a number of pamphlets that provide a little more information on it, and then we'll be out there to discuss with you. Does anyone have any questions before I take this tourniquet off? Because I can't feel my hand. But I'm ready to go, okay? The last time I did this, someone said, "Can you do push-ups?" And so, I ended up having to do some push-ups. And so, how long can I wear this? Technically, 2 to 3 hours. I won't, but I can. All right? Any questions at all? Thank you so much for your attention, and we hope you stay safe. Thank you.